Hello friends, welcome back. So in this class, we're going to be starting out with part B of your EC and IPL paper. Okay, and this has got to do with your intellectual property laws. So what exactly do you have in this part B of your ECIPL paper? Is you actually have 6 chapters, even though I can largely cover them as saying only 5 chapters. One is an introduction chapter. It tells us what is intellectual property, what are the elements associated with intellectual property, and certain international law protections governing the same. It's a fairly small chapter. It's merely an introductory chapter, but then when we come into individual intellectual properties, such as when we come to patent, trademarks, copyright, that time we will discuss a little bit more about the nature of the different types of intellectual property. Subsequently, we'll also be studying about all of the technical processes regarding registration, infringement, all of these things. Okay, so apart from these things, we'll be looking at GI and industrial designs. GI meaning geographical indications and industrial designs. So in this, we're starting out with our chapter number 15, and this is your introductory chapter into your part B. All right. So before we go into the chapter itself, I'd like to give you a basic understanding of what intellectual property is. So first things first, let's look at the concept of property. Okay. Now, if I have to look at the concept of property, how would I look at it? Yes, you see, property can be of multiple types. The first most common type of distinction that we can keep for property is that it is a tangible property, okay, or it is a intangible property. This is some a classification which we would have come across very commonly wherever we studied about it. So what do you mean by tangible property? It's simple. Tangible property is that which can be seen, okay, but intangible property cannot be seen. Tangible property can be touched or felt, whereas the opposite is for your intangible property, touched or felt. So the whole point is that in tangible property, you can touch it, you can see that thing, but then intangible property means that it is invisible, but at the end of the day, it's still a property. Now, what are the types of tangible property that we see? You see, in tangible property, we have your most common type of property, and that is either it is in the form of movable property or it is immovable property. Correct? So this is what we know. Whereas your intangible property, some of the most common ones, at least I'm just writing down two over here. One can be said to be goodwill, is an intangible property, and even your intellectual property rights are all intangible properties. So first we need to understand property before we start studying about intellectual property. Now, let's say, for example, that you own an immovable property. All right. So, let's assume that the immovable property is being owned by you. All right. So, for the time being, we'll say that it is owned by Harish. Now, this immovable property, how did Harish acquire it? That is the question. If Harish is the owner of the immovable property, how can he show proof of the same? You see, Harish should have acquired the property. The nature of acquisition, just a minute. The nature of acquisition is the first thing that we're going to first try to understand from a both tangible and intangible property point of view. Now, if it was immovable property, the nature of acquisition is that either Harish would have bought the property. Okay, if he bought the property, there should be a document to suggest proof of the same. What is that? A sale deed. Correct? Now, if he didn't buy it, but rather it was gifted to him, then what will he need? He will need a gift deed. Okay, he didn't buy it, he didn't get it as a gift also, but rather he inherited it. Okay, then it should show a will. Okay, and let's say for example he didn't inherit it using a will, then at least a court decree that shows that okay fine, he in fact is the owner of this property after his father or mother, etc. So some way this Harish should have shown proof that he is the owner of this immovable property. Great, now that we've understood how he acquired it, what are some rights that are attached to his property? You see, with whenever we talk about immovable property, we will say that every immovable property comes with what we call as a bundle of rights. What is this? A bundle of rights. You see, what is a bundle of rights? It means a lot of rights put together. Now, usually, if you look at the nature of rights, rights, as we can see, can either be fundamental rights, or it can be constitutional rights, or it can be statutory rights. You'll get any one right or a few rights attached to it. But by being an owner of a property, you get 10, 20 rights attached with it. Okay, that's why we call it as a bundle of rights. Now, these bundle of rights are not given to you by any fundamental right or constitutional right or statutory rights. Where does it come from? It comes from the interpretation where, and we'll try to understand it with the help of examples. See, the very first right that any person can enjoy is that any person has with respect to property is the right to enjoy the property. That means they can, let's say that this immovable property, okay, for our assumption's sake, is a 500-acre piece of land. Nice flat land, agricultural property in some cases. It's a 500 acre of land. Now let's say that instead of Harish, you owned this property. Tell me, how would you enjoy this property? Would you build a house on it? Okay, maybe if you have the resources to build a house, go ahead and build a house. No, but I don't need a house spanning 500 acres. So I'll build my house, but then I'll also build a swimming pool. Go ahead. If you then you think, no, no, too much property, too less to do with it. Let me build an amusement park. As long as you are complying with the required laws of India and the government, or any state laws, any central laws, etc., then go ahead and build your amusement park. You want to build an apartment over it, or do you want to build a hotel over it? Do whatever you feel like. And that is what means to enjoy your property. Now, enjoying my property is that, okay, I don't have the resources to build a hotel, or I don't have the means to run what do you say, an amusement park. So let me do one thing. Let me transfer my property, or let me do something with this property. So basically, you will end up having the right to transfer if necessary, right? And when we say transfer, what does it mean? You can either make a sale of it, or you can gift it to whoever you feel like, or if you want to pledge. Sorry, there's no pledging with immovable property. There's only mortgage of immovable property. If you want to mortgage it out, go ahead and mortgage it out. Okay, you have every right to transfer the property also. Now, you don't want to transfer it. If you only want to rent it out, go ahead and rent. The right to provide your property as a rental premises to someone else for a fixed income is also your right. Now, if you have the right to rent, then it goes hand in hand with a particular right. That is the right to re-enter your property. Now you see, when you rent out your property, what do? You take the your premises will be occupied by someone else. Now whether they're occupying it for 1 month or 10 years, it really just depends on the agreement between you and your tenant. Now let's say that the tenant has been paying rent consistently. Can you just walk into the property whenever you feel like it and be like, oh, this is my property, I will walk in, I will sit down, I will eat the food in the fridge? Why? Because it's my property. Yes, it is your property, but at the time of renting out, you are not allowed to enter your own property without certain permissions, right? So that is why at the time of renting, you are the owner, but you don't have possession over your property. Who has the possession over the property? The person who you rented it out to. But let's say, for example, that tenant stops paying rent to you, then what do? You can ask him nicely, please pay the rent. Now he doesn't pay the rent. Then what do? You ask a little bit more forcefully, and he still doesn't give the rent. What do you ask him to do? You ask him to vacate. He is refusing to vacate your property. What can you do at this time? You can re enter back into your premises. See, earlier when he was paying the rent properly, you did not have this right. But then now that he has stopped paying rent to you, you can always re-enter your property again, and then you can start enjoying your property. Correct? Because ultimately you are the owner. So this right goes hand in hand with rental. Now, another right that mostly comes with, I mean, not mostly, will definitely come with property is the right to sue. The right to sue. So, if someone causes any damage to your property or causes harm to your property, then you have every right to go and sue them in a court of law. Now, friends, if you had completed your module 1 where you had studied about jurisprudence, especially your civil procedure code, you would have seen that section number 16, okay? Section number 16 of the civil procedure code states all of the reasons for which you can go to the nearest court where your property is located in case there is some kind of a harm committed to your immovable property. So the remedy is there with respect to you, the right to sue as per section number 16 of the CPC itself. All right, but please understand it, these are all only rights. There are some liabilities also attached with any kind of a property. What are those liabilities? You see, with respect to liabilities, in case you have any person who has a property has to pay some kind of a municipal tax, okay, or whether it is a water tax or whether it is a land tax, some form of tax will be applicable to you, so that becomes a liability for you. Now second one is that the maintenance of the property. You see, property in its general sense, if it's a concrete building, it's still subject to a lot of repairs and damage. So ultimately, the owner has a liability to maintain its upkeep and maintain its integrity. Now, let's say, for example, that there is a property, your own property, and it has a nice 10-foot wall, a nice big compound wall, and it's made of solid stones, very strong structure, and this property has been there for a good 100 years. Your father before him, or your grandfather, they've all lived in this property, and it stood for such a long time. Now one day, out of nowhere, there's a sudden rain, and a nice heavy rain, and suddenly see means your that nice big compound wall ends up falling on the road, right? Now at this point, whose liability is it to fix it? It will be your liability. Why? Because you are the owner of the property. So liabilities in terms of maintenance will always be with that of the owner only. Now apart from this, if you had taken out any kind of a mortgage, then you will have a liability to pay out the principal as well as the interest along with it. Correct? So whenever we're talking about property, there are a bunch of rights and liabilities that are associated with it. Now, ma'am, why is it important for us to study about immovable property? Because when we understand the concept of immovable property, we can now come into understanding where intangible properties come from. You see, with respect to intangible property, and here I'll take the example of the subject that we are studying about, and that is your intellectual property rights. I told you it is a type of an intangible right. But if you look at IPRs, it's got a very interesting nature of acquisition. You see, the nature of acquisition can be divided into two parts. Now, for movable or immovable property, we had to show if we are the owners of the property, we have to show whether we bought it or whether it was gifted to us or whether we inherited it. But with respect to intellectual property, there you can divide the nature of acquisition into two parts. Now, what is this two parts? The first time it is being acquired and all of the subsequent acquisitions. You see, the first time that you are acquiring an intellectual property right, it has to be. Okay, it has to be acquired through the creativity of a person or through their invention or through what we call as first use. Okay, but more importantly, it's not just creativity, invention, and first use that grant you your first time registration. Some intellectual properties require you to make an application to a particular authority and then subsequently get it registered. You make an application, and then if that application has been granted to you, then we can say that it has been registered. Okay, now this registered intellectual property can then be sold, okay, through what? A sale deed, or it can be sold, it can be pledged, okay, or pledged can be the requisite deed. It can be a mortgage deed, it can be a transfer deed, whatever be the case. Then the third thing is, we don't exactly use the word rent with respect to intellectual property. The words that we'll use is either licensing or assignment. So these are two terms that we will be looking at when we're studying about intellectual property. We'll never say that I'm renting out my trademark or I'm renting out my intellectual property. We'll use the words such as we are licensing out my trademark or licensing out my patent. Or another word is also assignment. Okay. Now, can you see how the nature of acquisition itself differs over here? There is a process of getting that particular intellectual property, and then subsequently it can be sold, transferred, all of these things, just like an immovable property. Now, just like an immovable property, what are the rights and what are the duties attached to this? Okay, when we're talking about the rights, yes, you do, the owner of the intellectual property has a right to enjoy. Okay, but he can't just get a patent and keep it with him. He can't just take copyright and then keep it with him. The requirement of an intellectual property law is that if you've gotten a protection, you have to make it available to the public. Now, by making it available to the public, you have every right to enjoy the commercial exploitation, the commercial exploitation of that IPR. What does this mean? I'll repeat myself again. You don't just apply for a patent or a trademark or a copyright or an industrial design for the sake of keeping it with you. For the sake of keeping it on your inside your cupboard and then showing it to all of your friends and neighbors who come to your house to say, "Oh, look, I have a patent." That it's not some kind of an award that is given to you. It is a recognition. It is a monopoly that is granted to you for what? For your creativity, for your invention, and for your first use. But the fact that you have been granted this protection doesn't mean that you just keep it with you, but rather you have to make it available to the public. The requirement of IPR is that, first and foremost, yes, you have to make it available to the public. Now, this really depends on the nature of the intellectual property that we're talking about. And the main example that I can say is patent is your biggest example, because you're not allowed to take a patent and keep it for yourself. You have to make it commercially available for people to use. So that ends up becoming a duty of the patent holder. But once he makes it available to the public, then he can commercially exploit that IPR and he will earn all the profits related to that IPR. Okay, so another right is that this comes to the second right, the right to prevent unauthorized users from exploiting without permission. Okay, he is unable, he has every right to prevent another person from using his intellectual property without his permission. So that means if he authorizes it, then that person can use it, but if it is unauthorized, then completely out of the scope of scope of usage. So let's say you have a patent. Now, can I use that without your permission? No. I have to pay whatever price you ask, and that price cannot be judged later on. I cannot go to a court of law and say that this price is too high. I'm not going to pay this price. Nothing doing. Since you're the patent holder, the law grants you a right to commercially exploit everybody else. Okay, so this is a right, and yes, in addition to these rights, there is a right to transfer. Okay, the right to transfer, the right to enjoy. We've already written right to enjoy. We'll say right to sue is there. Okay, and there are a bunch of other rights associated with it. We'll look at each one in detail later. Now, in addition to the duties, what we can say is that every person who's an IPR holder has a duty to pay the fees, to pay the fee for the application, or even the renewal fee, to ensure that your IP protection continues for the requisite time. You see, IP protection is not a forever protection. It means that it's valid only for maybe 10 years or 20 years or 60 years, depending on the nature of the intellectual property. So you have a duty to pay the fees, and more importantly, the duty to maintain. Sorry, I won't say maintain, the duty to adhere to the laws. Okay, which law? If you have a trademark, then you have to adhere to the trademark law. If you have a patent, then you have to adhere to the patent law. So if you do anything against the patent law, then you are liable to pay a fine for it, or you are liable to be prosecuted under it. So these are what we call as the rights and duties relating to patents. But why sorry, not patents, your intellectual protection. But finally, we've still not understood why is it that these intellectual protections are even there. You see, we need to understand the concept from the word intellectual protection. The first word is intellectual. That means it is a faculty of the mind. That means your mind is either being creative, all right? It's either being creative, or it is inventing something, or there is some kind of a musical protection that is required, or there is some kind of an artistic work that you're being created. Ultimately, something is being created at the mind. Okay, ma'am, I'm creative, another person is not creative. Now what to do about that? You see, being creative and inventive alone is not the purpose of granting intellectual protection. Here they're saying that intellectual property. So that means this activity should have been converted into some kind of an action. So this, when it's in the mind, it's still in the form of an idea. That idea has to be translated into something physical, or some action should be applied to it so as to get the intellectual property protection. Please understand this. An idea plus action gives you protection. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, that I'm drawing something over here. Okay. And please excuse my drawing. I'm very terrible at drawing. Okay. So I'm drawing a house over here. Okay. This is a house. Now, is this artistic? Now, in your eyes, this might not be very artistic, but in my eyes, it's very artistic because I've drawn a house. Now, for this house, I immediately get a copyright protection. All right. Now, let's say, for example, that I write a poem. I write a poem instantly. Right here, right now, I write roses are red, violets are blue, you are so pretty, etc., etc., etc. I write a poem. Immediately, I get a copyright protection. So, somewhere using the faculty of mind, yes, I'm getting this protection. But do you really think this drawing of this house requires intellectual property protection? I'd say no. Why will anyone give a protection for this particular drawing? So now the question really becomes, what kind of artistic work or what kind of creative work really deserves the protection? Now, for this, we need to understand one concept. It's understood that anything that is being created in society, now, whether it is a new invention, whether it is a trademark, or whether it is a copyright, has come from the resources of the society itself. Okay, please note this down. The resources to create are being provided by whom? Are being provided by the society. Now tell me, for example, if you wish to write a book, all right, if you wish to write a book, how would you think of a story? Let's say you're writing a romance novel. Now what will you think of? Okay, there is a boy, there is a girl, they fall in love with each other, and then you've gotten yourself a romance novel over here. But where did the concept of a boy come from? Where did the concept of a girl come from? Or the story itself must have been something that you must have seen somewhere, correct? So you are observing the things in your society, the resources are coming from the society to go through your mind and get it converted into a kind of a creative activity, right? So the society, the resources to create end up making that creative idea. Now you get the creative idea to do something, but just the idea alone is insufficient. Now at this stage, okay, you do what? You put in effort, you put in money, you put in time, and then you create what? You create a particular artistic work or a musical work, or you write a book, or you write a poem, or you draw something, or you invent something, right? So it's any kind of a thing you draw, or let's say, I won't write draw. Let's say you make a painting, or you invent something new, or you produce some kind of a song, or more importantly, you create a whole movie itself. Okay, from an idea it has become into something, we'd say tangible, through effort, money, and time. But now, once that you've created this painting, invention, song, movie, etc., let's assume at this point that a movie is being created. Now, to create this movie, it must have cost a person around 200 crores to create this movie. We are seeing all these big budget films, right? It takes a lot of money to get the resources, people together, and make this movie. Now, what someone does is they take this movie and then they pirate it, or they distort it, or they change it, or some nonsense happens. What happens to all of the effort, time, and money that you have invested in making this thing? Now, this movie, after so much effort, is being taken by someone else, copied, remade, distorted, destroyed, and finally, this creative idea has gone for a waste. And so, what will happen? The people who are bringing in this 200 crores to actually invest and make this movie will think, why should I bother? Why should I really bother putting so much money and making something that anyways people are not going to protect? So that is why they're saying that, okay, no worries, you give this resource back to the society, but in the process of giving it back to the society, don't worry about it being diluted, destroyed, or spoilt in any way, because we'll give you a protection. Now who will give this protection? The law gives a protection. Protection to whom? Protection to the owner or the author of that, of this movie, painting, song, etc. So of that intellectual property. Okay, now can you understand why we give this intellectual property protection? Now take for example one movie that we see was Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is one of like the greatest characters, or children's characters, which was, yeah, it had its own movies, its Cartoon Network shows, all of these things. Now, what if someone took the character of Winnie the Pooh and made him into some kind of a ghost, or some kind of a distorted psychotic serial killer or something? Well, the whole point is that Winnie the Pooh was a character that um, there's a story attached to it, and that story ran in a particular way. Right now someone takes and changes the whole thing up, it kind of destroys the idea. That is why protection is given. Similarly, a movie, similarly, a patent, similarly, some invention or a song. All of these things require the protection of the government in such a way that their creativity is protected. What is being protected? The law protects the creativity of a person. All right, this is the need for intellectual protection. So ultimately, if you see, whatever, even if you want to invent something, you have to take the resources from the society, bring it together, and then make it into a tangible product that has to be given back to the society. But in the process of giving back to the society, just to ensure that it doesn't get distorted, we give them intellectual property protection. So now come back to a concept of your rights, duties, your nature of IPR, right? So, yes, when you have a property, you are protecting the intellectual character of that property. Now, let's try to understand one more concept with respect to intellectual property. So, let's say, for example, that a person has a patent, okay, and this patent is owned by a Mr. Vinish. Now, Mr. Vinish has a right to commercially exploit his patent. But you see, this let's say the patent that Mr. Vinish has is with respect to product. Okay, this product is being priced at rupees 1 lakh per unit. What is this product? We're not worried about that. Mr. Vinish, because he has a patent, he is now charging rupees 1 lakh per unit for this product. Okay. Now, what happens is that another person comes and he sees this. He's like, wow, 1 lakh rupees per unit. And then just in the year 2025, just give me a minute. Just in the year 2025, we can say that 5,000 units were sold. 5,000 units for 1 lakh rupees per unit is a great business opportunity. Great. Now, seeing this business model working out, one person named Mr. Prakash comes in. He sees this and then he thinks that, wow, if I had the same product, but then I won't sell it at 1 lakh rupees, I'll sell it for 80,000 rupees. So, what does he do? He takes the same product that has the that is being protected by the patent. He takes the same product and this time he manages to source it somehow. He takes the same product and then he sells it for 80,000 rupees per unit. Now the question is, can he do this? Just give me a minute. Okay, so per unit he decides to sell it for 80,000 rupees, and he has a great year. In the year 2026 he manages to sell 6,000 units. But can you see now what the problem is? Every other person will see one now one Mr. Prakash saw. Then someone else will come and say, oh wow, it's selling for so much. This is a great business opportunity. Let me also take the product and let me start selling it. But you see, this product, okay, to develop this particular product, you know how much time it took? It took 15 years of research and development. Okay. They spent more than 20 crore rupees. 20 crores was spent in the research, the development, the technical specifications, all of it. So when so much time and effort was being put by Mr. Vinish, Mr. Prakash and all the other competitors who came after him didn't spend one paisa apart from the cost of acquiring the product, and then they made such amazing profits. Now the reason why Mr. Vinish got the patent in the first place is because he put in these efforts to develop a product that he can commercially make available to the people. Now, the whole objective of intellectual property is that he can commercially exploit. They're not saying there is no rule under intellectual property that comes and says that you have to make your product available at a reasonable price. It is saying you can commercially exploit. And that is exactly what he is doing. If he is pricing it at 1 lakh rupees per unit, it is because of all the hard work and effort that came in, right? So This is why people get intellectual property protection. Now, a Mr. Prakash is doing an activity that we call as an infringement. What is he doing? He's infringing. Infringing what? He's infringing the patent of Mr. Vinish. But you see, Mr. Vinish sometimes, okay, sometimes the situation might be like this. Mr. Vinish might, in fact, just be a scientist. What is he? He's only a scientist. He does not have the marketing capability, he does not have the business acumen to actually go and take his product and sell it out into the world and make money out of it. He is like, you give me a lab, you put me to use with respect to the science of it all, and then I will have a working product for you. So now what Mr. Vinish can do is, being the scientist, he can get a patent protection for his patent. Okay. Now what Mr. Vinish can do is, just give me a minute. Okay. Mr. Vinish can now, he can choose to license his product to Mr. Prakash. Now, what will Mr. Prakash give in return? Mr. Prakash will pay something known as a royalty amount. So, at this point, Mr. Vinish can say that, okay, see, I have the patent. Now I license it out to you. Or, like I said, the word is not just license, the word that can also be used is something known as assignment. We'll study about these in detail later. Then, accordingly, Mr. Prakash can now give something known as a royalty to Mr. Vinish, and this way, Mr. Prakash, okay, is not infringing the patent. There is no infringement. So now, can you understand what we say, what we mean by the word infringement and not infringement? When it is authorized by the patent holder, it is not infringement, but where it is unauthorized by the patent holder, it is infringement. Okay, so throughout our concept of intellectual property, the first thing that we look at is what remedy is available to people like Mr. Vinish in case there is an infringement of their intellectual property. All right. So, keeping this in mind, I think I've given a general introduction into intellectual properties. Obviously, when we're looking at trademark, when we're looking at patent, and when we're looking at copyright, different rules will apply to them. So, we will look at each one of them individually in those separate chapters. Let's now come to our chapter number 15 itself, which where we get an introduction into the different types of intellectual properties, but also what is intellectual property, where how is it being protected at the international level? That is what we'll start out with our chapter number 15.